Hey there, my name is Auld, and I'm doing a data story presentation on my undergraduate thesis that I did with the Clark Honors College. So my thesis title was, What Does Being Latino, Latina, Latinx Mean to You? A Thematic Analysis of Oregon Latinx Students and Their Ethnic Identity. So for the data story presentation, I'm going to be in and out, so you're going to see me sometimes, see me not. And it's really just going to be kind of a more conversational walkthrough of what I did for my thesis. So why should we care? Why are we looking at Latinx students in Oregon? Why are we looking at ethnic identity? So the Latinx population in the United States is actually growing and is actually expected to double by the year 2050, making 1 out of 4 Americans Latinx, which is a huge number of people. But looking specifically at Oregon, historically, we haven't had a large Latinx population, being so far up north and kind of away from the border. But we're really home to a growing number of Latinx students. The population here, it's young, it's diverse, and it's growing in size by 72% since the year 2000. So as a result, nearly 23% of K through 12 students in Oregon are Latinx, and enrollment of Latinx students in Oregon public schools has grown by 18% in the past decade, while white students actually has decreased by 4%. So we can really see that there's a growing number of Latinx students that we really need to pay more attention to. So looking at this graph, we can see that generally dropout rates have really decreased among high school students, which is great, but Latinx students still have the highest dropout rate of any ethnicity at 10%, which is double the dropout rate for white students at 5%. So this is kind of alarming to see. And this can be also just for a number of reasons, but in general, Latinx students anticipate more barriers to school success than their white counterparts. So this might include kind of self-assessed ability, or can be impacted by different experience of discrimination they have, lower expectations from students and other teachers. So that can all really kind of play a role in why Latinx students are dropping out. So just shifting gears really quickly, we're going to talk about some background and some information that's related. So ethnic and racial identity is really a multidimensional concept that represents the different beliefs and values and attitudes that someone can have about their own racial ethnic group. And this develops over the lifespan. And a really particular kind of period in people's lives where this is really important is the adolescent years, because that's really when you're asking, like, who am I and how do I fit into the big grand picture of everything? So, and it's really complex because it can be a positive thing. You can feel a lot of connection to your ethnic identity and you can feel really good about it, or you can just kind of picture it as like a really negative thing in your life. You feel really like discriminated against, you feel a lot of racism, and you don't feel very confident in kind of that area of your life. So this can go either way. And with Latinx students, a positive ethnic identity is really important to some different protective factors. So it can really help with your psychological well-being. It can really impact school success, like academic efficacy. So really believing, like, you know, I can take up this task and I can do it. Some personal self-worth, feeling connected to school. So kind of that involvement piece of school. And then different things like leadership and resiliency to different kind of experiences of discrimination. So there can be a lot of benefits to having a positive racial ethnic identity. So one more piece of information is just what M.E.Ch.A is. So M.E.Ch.A is a Chicano organization that promotes culture and history and community engagement of students that identify as Latinx or Chicano. And it's really common in many high school and college campuses with more than 500 chapters nationwide. And there's really like a reinforcement of the strengths of Latinx culture and positive identity, positive ethnic identity in M.E.Ch.A. And what we kind of predict in this study, or for my thesis, is that the participation of M.E.Ch.A will kind of enhance ethnic identity affirmation or kind of positive feelings that somebody has about their ethnic identity. So for my thesis, or the present study, I used an inductive thematic analysis to pull kind of major themes from responses of the open-ended question, what does being Latinx mean to you? So what I really wanted to know from doing that kind of analysis is, how do Latinx students in Oregon see themselves in their ethnic identity? Do students that involved in things like M.E.Ch.A express more positive ethnic identity than those that don't participate in M.E.Ch.A? And do students that express more positive ethnic identity report higher grades than students that don't? So how do we answer those research questions? So really what I'm looking at is Latinx high school students in Oregon, and we had a 2-page survey. It's all self-reported. It asked for demographic information and other things like average grades, like different participation in different things like M.E.Ch.A. And at the very bottom of the 2-page survey, it asked the open-ended question, what does being Latino, Latina, Latinx mean to you? So this survey was given to attendees at the Cesar E. Chavez Leadership Conference. So it's just a 1-day leadership conference for people, participants, or the people who filled out the survey were between the ages of 14 and 19. There were 567 participants that filled out the survey in total. Just because it's kind of at the last in the end, only about 447 responded to the open-ended question. And then out of those kind of different people, 63% identified as female and 37% identified as male. So the students that were able to go to the conference were all self-selected, or they were encouraged to go by the different teachers at their high schools. And then participants, those students, were asked to fill out the surveys at the close of the conference, and the surveys were collected by conference personnel. So the analysis I decided to do on the data was inductive thematic analysis, and the inductive portion is really just, there wasn't any sort of coding scheme built up before those surveys were written. All of the thematic analysis is done after the fact, and it's kind of just really data-driven in that way. So the kind of methods that I did for my thesis were Braun and Clark's guidelines for thematic analysis, and those kind of go as follows. So it's really important to familiarize yourself with the data before you get started. So I read the few hundred responses maybe about 3 times over before I got really started. And then with my coding team, I was able to generate some initial codes with them, and that really just means pulling out the important aspects of each response and kind of giving them a name, and then going through all the responses and kind of marking each response with those important aspects that appear or codes. So once you kind of do all of that coding, and you have to build a coding scheme and everybody kind of has to be on the same page. Once you do all of that, you're able to generate and search for some themes. So it's really like a higher level of looking at the data, where you're only looking at the codes and you're trying to build, how do these fit in together? What do these say together that they don't say apart? So then kind of after reviewing and defining and naming those themes, you're able to produce a report, or in my case, my thesis. And I did this with a coding team of 3, including myself, and we're all Family and Human Service students. And it's really important during this whole process to not influence each other. So we were being very careful about kind of talking about how we're going to code the data without saying, I coded this response as this. And that's really important for the integrity of kind of the research and the reliability of the kind of data that you're able to pull from that. So during the coding process, we identified 36 different themes. They're all kind of thrown up there, and some of them include community or roots, expression, family, hard work, self-identity, feeling different was also a theme. So there's lots of different themes that arose from our data. So after we were done coding all of the responses, we were able to create themes from those codes. And that's kind of up here on the screen as a thematic map. And we decided to kind of sort our themes based off of Bronfenbrenner's ecological model. So that is split up into kind of the individual, the microsystem that they're in, the mesosystem, and then so on. And that's kind of the way that we sorted our themes, and those are just the different kind of influences and variables that have on the individual. So once we're done creating all the themes and codes, what does it all mean? The most prominent themes that arose for participants' responses were their own individual characteristics, social cultural influences, and interpersonal connections that they had. So the most common individual characteristics that appeared were the ability to express oneself, and their self-identity, individuals' worth ethic, and resistance to stereotypes and other things. And many students kind of cited their connection to their culture, tradition, or heritage as a key factor as well. Students also expressed kind of the feeling of connection to their family or the larger Latinx community as an important part of their ethnic identity. And students' connection to their ethnic identity were really kind of more personal than impersonal. So kind of just they weren't really limited to their experiences of discrimination or disadvantages that they felt or the stereotypes that were put on them. It was really kind of really strength-based responses that we found. So now that we kind of understand how students conceptualize their ethnic identity, we can answer the two other research questions. So one of the research questions were, do students that are involved in M.E.Ch.A express more positive ethnic identity than students that do not? And so we indicated positive ethnic identity with coded responses for pride. And we found a significant relationship between M.E.Ch.A participation and coded responses for pride. And then for the third research question, we have, do students that express more positive ethnic identity report higher grades than students that do not? And we used pride again as an indicator of positive ethnic identity, and we found no significant relationship between students that got higher grades and responses for pride. So all in all, we found that Latinx students' self-identity, interpersonal connections, and connections to their culture and their heritage were really important to their conceptualization of their own ethnic identity. And because we found there was a significant relationship between participation in M.E.Ch.A and responses coded for pride, or basically just having a positive kind of outlook on your own ethnic identity, and since positive ethnic identity is really a protective factor for Latinx students, participation in M.E.Ch.A is really beneficial to these students. So kind of like a major outcome of this study is kind of that it's telling us that we should really be supporting these organizations like M.E.Ch.A or other culturally informed kind of groups like that because they produce so many kind of positive outcomes for Latinx students. So thank you so much for kind of watching my presentation, and have a wonderful day.